Hey everybody, it's Ellie Mae here, joined with Shannon in 3, 2, 1. Happy Friday, everybody. Um, yeah, it's so weird. Shannon and I were just talking about how weird it feels with 4th of July being in the middle of the week and how it threw us off. I felt for a while today that it felt like Monday. I mean, it
Yeah,
isn't.
it does.
Yeah. I was like getting into work mode. I'm like, yes, like all motivated. And then I'm like, it's Friday. Usually I'm way more chill. Oh, 4th of July. This makes sense. But did you have a good 4th of July?
I did. Went to my aunt and uncle's house. My cousin was there. It was just really fun. We watched Independence Day, the classic film of 4th of July. I feel
You
like
know who I have the biggest crush on?
Jeff Goldblum.
I can't even handle myself.
Have you watched the BuzzFeed video of him reading thirst tweets?
Yes, of course I have.
Oh my God, I die. I said that to I should have said it to you. I didn't know you like Jeff Goldblum. I said that to 5 people. It was like, oh my God, must watch, must watch.
He's just so funny. But yeah, we had Independence Day on today, actually, in the background, just having it on. And I was like, gosh. Anyway.
So good. With
yeah.
the dad, he just, he and Will Smith are the duo you never knew you needed.
I know. Sorry to the fiance if you're watching, but yeah. Anyway, so today's question is Scott Pruitt resignation draining the swamp? Is his resignation draining the swamp? I can't talk. It's Friday. So I was just reading up a little bit. He is from Oklahoma, so that's where I am right now. And so he was,
He's the governor of Oklahoma?
No, he wasn't a senator. I don't know, maybe a congressman or something. I can't remember. All I know is he was our little claim to fame in the Trump administration, which is quite embarrassing now, especially because of his spending issues, which Oklahomans have a huge problem with. So, Scott, what the heck were you doing? We don't understand. But yeah, I was reading up on some of this stuff, and I'm just like, I have never seen a conservative spend so much taxpayer dollars, and that's super annoying. So I think, draining the swamp, this sounds like it's happening, but Trump obviously wasn't really having him resign, I don't think. So I don't know what the deal is with this whole thing. But how do you feel about it?
I don't think Trump pushed him to resign, but I do, if I remember correctly, Trump had made a few comments that were clearly sort of calling out Pruitt for why are you doing this? Why are you taking all this lobbyist money and stuff? Yeah, I do, I think to me, Scott Pruitt, I think he was emblematic of this class of politician that is closely in bed with lobbyists, that is about advancing special interests, that is about, enriching himself at the expense of sort of maybe the larger good of either the department he's overseeing or the state or the organization or whatever. So I'm glad that he's gone. I don't think that he was an exemplary politician. I think he showed, he was corrupt, basically. But
Sorry. Yes. We're both so no, you go ahead. I love it. But no, so I think, so the idea with Scott Pruitt was that he would be in an agency where he fundamentally, I think, disagreed with it. And right. So I think they just executed this so poorly. If they were trying to make a point about something regarding the EPA, they could have actually done that, and it would have made everyone probably very mad. But they totally missed the ball on this by him flying first class everywhere on taxpayer dollars, doing A, B, and C. Yeah, he said it's for security reasons and blah, blah, blah. But it's just you really missed it here. It doesn't make any sense. And now instead of, having the conversation about the environment from a conservative point of view, or even just from Scott Pruitt's point of view, because I'm not saying his views even reflect all conservatives, but now we're talking about you wasting taxpayer dollars when you are an Oklahoma conservative. This is embarrassing.
Yeah, I think to me it's, the sort of larger, there's sort of two things in my head about draining the swamp. So if I compare Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump, Hillary Clinton, she had been in politics for so long. She had this deep, deep bench of people who worked for her. And I know people who are liberals who work in DC who would have liked to work for the State Department or worked for Hillary's administration. However, before the election, like before she even started probably throwing her hat into the ring, she already had cemented every single position. Like she had this deep bench. So, which I didn't realize, which was like pretty much every appointee, she already knew who was going to be in place. Yeah. She had this coterie of people for every position that was like already filled. Many of them who had worked in, State Department before, who had worked in government, but she had it all filled. Trump came in and did not really, in some ways, I don't think he was even that prepared to win. I think it was a surprise even to him. And so he certainly was the opposite, where he did not have a long list of, I think he entered office and so many positions remained unfilled for quite a while because they didn't have a list. They were sort of like, we're going to deal with this as it comes. And it was sort of the opposite approach. And then Trump ended up appointing a lot of people from the private sector. And Scott Pruitt is an example. A lot of people who were maybe in their work in the private sector had done work in opposition to the institutions that they were now leading up. So whether that was, the EPA or like privatizing education for Betsy DeVos, like there are multiple examples. And I think the message, right, and the intent, like you're saying, is he was trying to say, look, I feel like we need to scale back, if not get rid of these organizations. So I'm putting someone in place who's against them. Mm-hmm. So I'm like, it's sort of in my head. I'm not sure, like, it's not necessarily good to me that Hillary Clinton was like, had her complete cabinet stacked already and knew exactly who she was going to put in. All of these people who've been in government forever, who have been loyal to her. That doesn't feel right to me, But also Trump's approach of plucking people from the private sector who have done work in opposition or have not had that much experience actually administering these type of government benefits or oversight. I don't know that feels right to me either. And I think Scott Pruitt is sort of the negative example of what can happen with that approach, which is you get someone in who really has no interest in being a government employee. He doesn't really even support necessarily the EPA. And he's kind of looking at it as like, hey, this is like a plum assignment. I'm going to fly first class around the country. And like, soon I'm going to quit this job in a few years and go be an even richer, private sector person. Like, that's obviously the worst aspect of that. So I'm like, I don't know the answer, but like, what do you think is the appropriate thing? Like, what would actually drain the swamp? Like, is it hiring people from the private sector or like people who work in research, or is it hiring government employees? Like, what is the answer?
Yeah, I don't know. I think with, this idea that we should have term limits, aside from the idea that it could, resort to bureaucrats and so staffers kind of running the show. That is one thing that I would hope would help drain the swamp. Obviously, we're not doing that right now. But there is a swamp, an establishment swamp on both sides. And they kind of, it's just sort of this issue that I don't see it being solved anytime soon. I think it partially is. I do like the idea of taking people from the private sector to sort of try things out. Obviously, it didn't work out in this case. And I mean, part of me does believe that there was just a lot of negative stuff over Pruitt. Maybe that wasn't all valid. As far as what I'm reading, it's valid. I just think it might have been heightened. And that also pressured him into leaving. So I don't know, like, it's just difficult. I'm kind of a fan of the idea that you have people running certain agencies that they might have a disagreement with, because I'm kind of about limited government. So I'm sort of okay with agencies scaling back and things like that for the most part. So I kind of like that idea. But again, it wasn't executed in this way at all. And as far as the positions of the EPA, I'm not even really addressing that. I'm just saying I kind of like the idea of, I don't know. But it's just so hard. I'm at a loss for words.
No, it is a difficult problem. And I think I've mentioned this before, but there have been some studies in the field of economics that show that often if you have an organization, I think they probably usually look at obviously private sector organizations. If you have an organization that's having trouble, it's losing money or it's super bureaucratic or whatever it is, it's actually easier to completely burn it down to the ground and restart than it is to actually fix it from within. And the problem, we look at this at public versus private sector unions. The problem with the public sector with government is that it is truly too big to fail. Like, it's not like our government can, it could, but like, we don't want our government to collapse and then restart. So that is a problem. And it is a question of how do you, how do you ratchet back, you know, if you, like, for example, we created the Department of Homeland, like if you look at the number of cabinet, like the actual cabinet positions, it just keeps growing. It never decreases. Like, for example, Bush created Homeland Security. Like, I don't know that we need Homeland, like, don't we have enough? You know, it's like, and it never decreases. And that's a problem. And I think, and that's true. Like, I worked in the private sector, and I worked at one point in this department where my boss knew that there was going to be cuts in the organization, like looming on the horizon, there was going to be some cuts. So he very strategically went out and scooped up a bunch of other departments and moved them under his department so that there would still be cuts, but he was operating from a bigger like he had a larger pool of people. So even after the cuts, he would still have like a large number of people in his organization. Anyway, the hoops that people will jump through to continue to have power and have their jobs, like, that's very difficult to push against. And I do feel like our bureaucracy is bloated. So yeah, it's a tempting idea to say, bring someone in from the private sector. But it obviously did not work out with Scott Pruitt. Not to say that can't work out with other people. You know, you do want someone who also has, like, this is the thing with Rex Tillerson too, right? Like, he came in and he was like, the State Department is bloated. We need to cut it down. There was a hiring freeze that he implemented. You know, he had his inner like group of people and he wasn't really interacting with the larger State Department. But like in practice, that just meant that like a lot of the State Department was just operating on their own without direction from him and like from the top. And that's good. So I feel get someone from within the organization who's like, I know exactly where all the cuts can be made and like so in this, you know, maybe that's better. I'm not
like neglect leadership. Like shrinking government takes leadership. It doesn't just take neglect and have it explode. Like you were saying, government just keeps growing. These agencies, there's always one added, you know, under Bush, Homeland Security, etc. I read a quote today by Milton Friedman that said, "Nothing is so permanent as a temporary government program." And of course, that's sort of talking about something else, but it is true. I think it is true about this stuff too. It just keeps growing and growing. It's so hard to shrink it back, and it's so hard to get rid of the corrupt people within. It's just, I mean, especially with people who plan on being politicians since they're like 18 and they have this idea that they're going to be there and they put all their energy and effort towards that, and then they're in there until they're 70. So it's just crazy. But Donald Trump, sorry, go ahead.
Like impossible to fire someone in government.
No. Donald Trump said, he tweeted about it, of course. Are we frozen? No, okay. Shannon, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear
you. Okay. Could you read it? Sorry, it's always so small.
I've accepted the resignation of Scott Pruitt as the administrator of the EPA. Within the agency, Scott has done an outstanding job, and I will always be thankful to him for this. And then he has something else that I can't read. The Senate confirmed.
Yeah, someone, Andrew Wheeler will on Monday assume duties as the acting administrator of the EPA. So, yeah.
I've moved that was their great and lasting EPA agenda. Yeah. I mean, that's very like for Trump, you know. He's not like saying it, he's just sort of like, congrats, he left, okay, you know.
Yeah, so this is kind of weird. A Pruitt staffer said she reached out to the Trump International Hotel in Washington after Pruitt said he thought there was an old mattress that he could purchase from the president's hotel. Government ethics experts said the rental searches might have clashed with ethics rules that Pruitt staffer resigned in June. I mean, that's kind of petty stuff. Like, I don't think that's very serious, but that's just kind of bizarre. And then there were things about, let's see. So the EPA Inspector General is probing Pruitt's travel practices. He would frequently travel home to Oklahoma on the taxpayer's dime. The IG twice expanded the probe, first as the agency acknowledged Pruitt used both a private plane and military jet to travel 4 times instead of flying commercial at the price of $60,000, and again to include all of Pruitt's travel from 2017. So conservatives complained a lot about expenses under Democrat presidents, Obama, etc., that we thought were ridiculous. And then you have these conservatives coming in, like Scott Pruitt and Ben Carson, who decide to spend all this money. Like Ben Carson spent a bunch of money on a desk or something. And it's just like, we cannot do that if you're gonna, I hate that so much. Anyway, there was another interesting thing. Pruitt defended his first class travel. Yeah, he's flying first class, saying it's for security purposes, which for me, I'm a little sympathetic with security reasons, obviously, but I just don't really buy that entirely, and maybe then cover the difference yourself. I don't know. Like, maybe I'm being totally wrong about that, but I just, whatever. So then he spent $43,000 to purchase and install a soundproof booth, which violated federal spending law, according to the Government Accountability Office. And the Sierra Club obtained documents through Freedom of Information Act requesting to show how Pruitt's aide ordered 12 fountain pens with the EPA seal and Pruitt's signature on them for $1,500. Just like weird. So yeah, there's a lot of things. Some of them are a little pettier than others. I think there's a more serious one with obviously the lobbyist and the condo and all that. Pruitt lived for about 6 months in a Capitol Hill condo owned by a healthcare lobbyist whose husband has lobbied EPA and paid below the market rate. You know, just stuff like that. Not cool. That's so.
Yeah, just don't do that. Like, it's not like you can't afford to like rent an apartment. I don't understand. Like, you know, I have friends who work, you know, for the government and like, or like students, and they can like afford to rent an apartment in DC. I'm sure, Scott Pruitt, you can. But yeah, it's just the overall, yeah, I think there's sort of two separate things. And especially on the liberal side, obviously there has been like people who are Democrats hate the idea of having someone in the EPA who just fundamentally doesn't really agree with the EPA and maybe doesn't agree with climate change, you know, wants to roll back regulations instead of add more or enforce the ones there are. So obviously Democrats are opposed for that reason to Scott Pruitt, and someone like him, it looks like his successor will probably have similar views. Similar to Betsy DeVos, you know, Democrats are against the idea of privatizing all education and, you know, and moving it to the private sector. So for that reason, they're against Betsy DeVos. So there are sort of two separate things that I think it's important to separate. One is the ideological differences. I mean, and I think that's sort of the underlying thing to kind of talk about here as well. Like, Scott Pruitt is like obviously a bad actor. It's like, why are you spending like $1,000 on like a pen and like a condo from a lobbyist? Like, that's just weird and stupid. Like, don't do that. Like, that's so obvious. You should not do that. But then I feel like the underlying issue here is, you know, what does that mean? And we sort of use draining the swamp a little facetiously, like as this sort of rallying cry, you know, that Trump used. But it's a real thing. Like, how do we actually, what are we supposed to do with these agencies? You know, I don't think it's good to, if Hillary Clinton was in power and she had someone heading up the EPA who was like, all regulations, like environment only. They're not thinking about business. They don't care about the private sector. They have no experience there, no connections there. They're just like we're only caring about like protecting, you know, wildlife, et cetera, with no thought to business. I mean, that is a trade-off. We have to consider both of those. So I think, and I don't know the answer, but where do we get?
My family would love an EPA like that. My family would just love an EPA like that. Gosh, that is like, I mean, they're not single issue voters, but if they were, it would be the environment for sure. So they can't stand Scott Pruitt, and it's like so funny because it's like, sorry, I'm from Oklahoma, or I'm not from Oklahoma, but sorry guys, like you feel like halfway responsible. No, I don't even. I just think it's funny. But yeah, and then I think Trey Gowdy even wanted to inquire on Scott Pruitt's practices, blah, blah, blah. So even Republicans were like, dude, what's going on?
Right. He was such an egregious violator of like real ethics that everyone, even his supporters were like, I mean, even Trump, who like appointed him and like turns, you know, generally is like turns a blind eye, I would say, to, this is not just Trump, but like I think any president, it's like, these are my guys. Like, I'm going to give them the benefit of the doubt. You know, that's just how it works. But even something fishy.
The benefit of the doubt. That's very true. So we will see if there will be a fundamental change in the EPA in the future. I mean, it's just funny. Obama said he wanted to fundamentally transform America, and now it's like we're seeing Trump put in people who will fundamentally transform these agencies. I just think it's interesting. And I don't know. We'll see what his successor does, and if he's going to make people mad, and if he needs security like Scott and needs to fly first class on the taxpayer's time.
Yeah, right. That's the whole thing with, I mean, that it's like, look, if you're the president and like close to him, you get Secret Service because people like try to kill you. If you're like the EPA director or like the head of housing services, like people are not trying to kill you. Like, I don't think that's a
And
real.
you know what's even sadder about all of this is we have congressmen and senators who don't go at home as much as he does to visit with their constituents, and he doesn't even represent, you know, voters like that, and he's going home more than our congressmen, which actually is really messed up of our own congressmen and senators, but
It's true.
it's so weird. Anyway, I guess that's it. Yeah, any last thoughts?
Yeah, I think it just underlying this, I think, is, just an interesting question of like, what is the correct response here? Do you pull someone in from the private sector who, probably fundamentally would, and I think his successor will probably be of this ilk, really thinks the EPA should be, if not completely gone, like stripped down to a much lower level than it certainly is now? Is that the way to like cut back on government bureaucracy? Does that make us more efficient as a government? Does that make us more, or does that mean that we're stripping away, certainly many Democrats, and I certainly have qualms about that, are we stripping away, like not preparing for climate change and et cetera? So do you need someone who's like a researcher, who's like an academic, who knows all about the environment and the impact of all these businesses, and they can sort of, as an intellectual, they know maybe the right path to go? Or do you need someone who's like an insider in the government and they can sort of grease the wheels with politicians to get stuff passed? Like, I don't know. It just feels like, I guess the one good thing I will say that I feel like is unequivocally good is this is the value of, you try something. If it doesn't work, you try something else. So if, Trump is trying something new, which is bringing someone in from the private sector who basically wants to like cut away the EPA, let's see what that does. Like, I am afraid of some of the consequences. Environment, but that is a new approach, and I feel like something new is, at least there's a chance that
it is true, because we're kind of in this perpetual spinning cycle with everything, so it is kind of interesting to shake things up, and like you said, there might be consequences, so hopefully not, but yeah, and sorry we didn't get to many comments. I saw a lot of you kind of fighting over who can say vote blue or vote red more often. So I like the enthusiasm. That's kind of an organic conversation that has started in the thread. But yeah, just vote. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Vote. Yeah. But I think that's it for today. Happy Friday. Hope you guys had a safe and happy Independence Day. And we will see you on Monday, right?
Bye. Yeah.
Bye, guys.